At a crowded airport gate, an elderly veteran holding a first-class ticket was told he no longer mattered. A middle seat, a dismissive shrug. But what happened just 8 minutes later shocked everyone, even the airline's top executive. Who was this quiet old man? And why did his presence bring an entire corporation to its knees? Stick around and don't forget to hit that subscribe button before we dive into today's story. The airport buzzed with the familiar chaos of modern travel, rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, long lines curling through security checkpoints. Gate A12 at Atlanta International was no different. Screens flickered with changing times, and somewhere near the back of the terminal, a soft classical tune played faintly beneath the noise. James Harlan, 87, stood quietly among it all. He wore a pressed button-down shirt tucked neatly into old khaki slacks and held his blazer folded over one arm. His shoes were polished but scuffed at the edges, the kind of shine that comes from habit, not vanity. In his breast pocket, tucked behind a pen, was a neatly folded first-class boarding pass, Seat 2A, Washington, D.C., his final destination, the capital's war memorial ceremony honoring veterans of foreign conflict. James wasn't one to ask for comfort. He'd spent a lifetime without it, from frigid foxholes in the Ardennes to long shifts as a city maintenance worker. But today wasn't about indulgence. It was about respect, and it was about his granddaughter, Tracy, a school teacher with little to spare. She had insisted on booking him a first-class ticket, using every frequent flyer mile she had and covering the rest with her own paycheck. "You deserve this, Grandpa," she'd said. No arguments. So James arrived early, as he always did, and joined the priority boarding line with his ticket clutched in hand. His back ached a dull, familiar throb, but he stood tall, chin raised slightly, eyes scanning the gate. The gate agents were busy, a younger man named Devon scanning phones, and a woman mid-30s, severe bun, corporate smile, who appeared to be in charge. Her name tag read Lindsay. When James stepped forward and handed over his boarding pass, Lindsay's expression shifted. The tight smile faded into a frown as she peered at her monitor. She typed something, paused, then typed again. She said, mostly to herself. James waited. After another moment, she looked up, her voice slipping into something too smooth to be sincere. "Mr. Harlan, it appears there's been an equipment change. The aircraft scheduled for this flight was substituted, and unfortunately, the new plane has a smaller first-class section." James blinked. "I see, but my seat 2A was confirmed months ago." "Yes, sir," Lindsay replied, already reaching for the printer. "However, due to our reallocation policy and a high number of Diamond Elite members on today's flight, we've had to make some adjustments." She handed him a new boarding pass. Seat 35C, middle seat, back row. James stared at the slip of paper in his hand. "I have chronic back problems," he said softly. "That's why my granddaughter, I understand," Lindsay said, not unkindly, but not listening either. "It's policy." And just like that, a decorated veteran with a ticket to first class had been dropped into the back of the plane. No apology, no explanation that felt human, just procedure. James stepped aside, paper in hand, heart heavier than his luggage. James stepped away from the counter, the flimsy slip in his hand feeling more like a dismissal than a boarding pass. He didn't say anything as he moved to the side of the waiting area, lowering himself slowly into a hard plastic seat near the gate. His back complained, as it always did, but he welcomed the pain now. It gave him something else to focus on. He stared at the new ticket, 35C, middle seat, back row. Just beneath his name in small print were the letters MOH, a code entered months ago during booking to identify Medal of Honor recipients. A note that, according to protocol, was supposed to ensure proper treatment and recognition, but it might as well have been invisible ink. After a few moments, James stood and walked quietly back to the counter. He waited for a break in the commotion and then gently cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said. "Miss Lindsay, She turned, eyes already glazed with impatience. Yes, I just wanted to clarify something. He held up the new boarding pass, voice calm, almost apologetic. You see, this seat was arranged specifically because I'm attending a national ceremony in Democracy, the White House event. It's for veterans. I served in World War II. My record should be flagged in your system. Lindsay exhaled softly through her nose, folding her arms. Sir, I do understand, but as I explained, equipment changes are out of our hands. The aircraft swap reduced our first-class seats from 24 to 16. Unfortunately, your ticket, while listed as first class, was booked using miles and not paid revenue. She delivered it like a math problem, devoid of emotion. But my granddaughter spent all her savings, I'm sure she did, Lindsay interrupted, not unkindly but with finality. However, under our contract of carriage, seat assignments are not guaranteed, and in cases of involuntary reseating, our system prioritizes based on fare class and frequent flyer status. Revenue customers, particularly our Diamond Elite members, take precedence. James nodded slowly. So none of it matters, he murmured. Not my service, not the purpose of the trip, not my age, not the pain. Lindsay tilted her head, her face showing something almost like sympathy, but quickly shifting back to protocol. You're free to submit for a refund of the fare difference after your trip. There's a form online. Behind her, the younger gate agent Tyler was watching. His expression was uneasy, shifting from his screen to James and back again. When Lindsay turned to her monitor, he opened his mouth as if to speak, then caught her eye. A glance, brief but sharp, silenced him. He looked down. James stood still for another moment, then whispered, I understand, and walked away. Back at his seat, he let the boarding pass fall onto his lap. Around him, travelers chatted, children ran between rows of chairs, and boarding groups were called over the intercom. No one noticed the elderly man sitting perfectly still, eyes glazed, hands trembling ever so slightly. It wasn't about the seat. It was never about the seat. What stung was the quiet dismissal of everything he represented, of every sacrifice that ticket was meant to honor. He thought of Tracy, how she had printed out the confirmation herself, highlighting 2A with a yellow marker like it was something sacred. How she had triple-checked the TSA instructions. How proud she was that her grandfather would be flying first class to a national event. And now, what would he tell her? He looked down at his shoes, clean but old, just like him. Across the room, Tyler approached with hesitant steps. Sir, he said, voice barely audible. I'm sorry about what happened. I just wanted to say. James looked up. The young man seemed barely out of college, blue tie too tight, shirt slightly wrinkled under his navy vest. He looked nervous. You don't need to say anything, James replied, not unkindly. Tyler nodded. If there were anything I could do. He glanced over his shoulder, where Lindsay was deep in conversation with another passenger. Just hang tight. Okay. James smiled faintly. You've done more than most already. As Tyler returned to his post, James sat back again and let the buzz of the gate wash over him. His fingers traced the edges of the ticket without thinking. He wasn't angry. No. He'd seen anger. Real rage. In muddy trenches and burning towns. This was something else. A quieter ache. A kind of grief. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and let his thoughts drift. Memories came, uninvited young men laughing in the snow, boots crunching across foreign ground, the face of his best friend just before the shell hit. He'd never thought of himself as a hero. He still didn't. But he knew what dignity looked like and what it felt like when it slipped through your hands. Minutes passed. A voice called first-class boarding, and he glanced up as passengers with fine coats and shiny suitcases moved past him. Some looked down at their phones. None looked at him. That was the part that truly hurt, not being unseen, but being irrelevant. He pulled his wallet from his jacket and opened it. Inside was a small laminated card Tracy had given him. "Just in case," she'd said, slipping it behind his license. "This number bypasses the regular line. It's the special one for veterans." He stared at the card for a long time, then carefully closed the wallet. Not yet. Not just yet. He had nearly slipped the wallet back into his jacket when something about the card nagged at him, a voice in his mind. Quiet but persistent, like Tracy's when she really wanted him to listen. "This number bypasses the regular line. It's the special one for veterans. Just in case." "Grandpa." He stared at it again. A simple laminated rectangle. No logo. Just a toll-free number in black ink and the words, "Veterans First Desk, Meridian Sky Airlines." He hesitated. The boarding group for rows 25-35 had just been called. His row, 35C. James let out a long breath, then reached for his phone and dialed. It rang once, then again. Then "Veterans First Desk. This is Daniel speaking. How can I assist you today?" A human voice, no menu, no automation. James blinked, thrown slightly off guard. "Yes, hello. My name is James Harlan. I was supposed to be on Flight 362 to Washington, D.C. I had a confirmed first-class seat 2A, but I've been reassigned to 35C. I'm traveling for a veterans ceremony at the Capitol. The gate agent said there was an aircraft change. I thought I'd call." He tried to sound steady, unemotional, but the fatigue was in his voice. "Mr. Harlan," Daniel replied, instantly professional but warm. "Thank you for calling. I want to begin by thanking you for your service. Let's take care of this." "All right, may I please have your booking reference?" James fumbled briefly with his folded itinerary and read off the number. Daniel's keyboard clicks were swift but not rushed. "I see your reservation," Daniel said. "Confirmed in first, yes. 2A, booked under Medal of Honor status. And you're traveling today for the commemorative veterans ceremony?" "Correct, that's right." "Okay," Daniel said, his tone sharpening slightly. "And the gate agent reassigned you due to an aircraft change?" "Yes. She said the new plane had fewer first-class seats and that others had higher priority because of loyalty status." A pause. The typing stopped, then resumed, then silence again. "Mr. Harlan," Daniel said slowly. "First, I want to sincerely apologize. What you've experienced today is not only unacceptable, it's a violation of our priority handling protocol for decorated veterans, particularly those traveling to federal recognition events. This should not have happened under any circumstances." James didn't speak. He wasn't sure if he could. "I'm escalating this immediately," Daniel continued. "Please remain at your current gate. Do not board the flight. Someone will meet you there within the next few minutes. You will not be seated in 35C. James exhaled slowly. "Thank you, son. I didn't expect this to lead anywhere. I understand, but it is exactly why this number exists." "Sir," Daniel said, "you're not alone in this." Then the line disconnected. No hold music, no runaround, just quiet certainty. James leaned back in his seat, still holding the phone, uncertain what to feel. Part of him doubted anything would come of it. Corporations had layers, protocols, legal walls built high and wide. But something about the young man's voice. There was no checklist in it, no script, just concern. He looked around the terminal. Passengers were still boarding. The woman who'd been sitting across from him was gone now, her seat vacant. He could hear the whirring beep of scanners and the occasional bark of overhead announcements. It all felt distant. He reached into his wallet again and gently touched the card, folding it back into the billfold where it had sat for months, unnoticed. It had felt so silly at the time, an extra precaution, like carrying an umbrella in the desert. But now it had turned out to be the one lifeline he didn't know he needed. Across the gate, Lindsay was still processing boarding passes, her face taut with efficiency. She hadn't looked in his direction once since their last exchange. Tyler stood nearby, nervously tapping the edge of the counter with his finger. his eyes occasionally flickering toward James as if waiting for something. James gave him a faint nod. He checked his watch. 4 minutes since the call, maybe 5. He had learned long ago that bureaucracy moved at its own pace, if it moved at all. Still, something about the urgency in Daniel's voice had felt different, and then movement. From the far side of the terminal came the sound of brisk footsteps, loud and determined, not the casual shuffle of passengers. Heads turned. A small group of people in suits was moving fast, weaving through the crowd like a current against the tide. At the center of the group was a tall man in his early 50s, his tie slightly askew and a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning. He was flanked by 2 assistants and someone speaking rapidly into a headset. Their pace was urgent, almost frantic. They reached the gate and bypassed the counter completely. The man, clearly someone of authority, scanned the seating area. "Where is he?" he said, not loud, but commanding. "Where is Mr. James Harlan?" Lindsay froze. Tyler pointed. "Over there, sir, by the windows." The man crossed the space in long strides, stopping just short of James, who had stood by instinct. "Mr. Harlan," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Victor Langford, President and CEO of Meridian Sky Airlines. I came as soon as I was made aware of the situation." James, stunned, took the offered hand. "Sir," Langford continued, his voice low and sincere, "on behalf of our entire organization, I offer you my deepest apologies. What happened at this gate was a failure of empathy, protocol, and simple human decency. It should never have occurred." "I wasn't asking for anything special," James said softly. "And you shouldn't have to," Langford replied, his voice tightening. "We'll make this right. Now," he turned back to his team. "Reopen the boarding door. Seat 1A. Find who's in it and explain they're being reseated. Escort Mr. Harlan on board personally. Also, moving forward, all travel for him and his immediate family on Meridian Sky is comped, no exceptions, no expiration." Then, to James, he said gently, "You will fly in comfort, sir, not because of policy, because of principle." James said nothing for a long moment. Then, quietly, "Thank you. I appreciate you showing up." Langford met his eyes. "You showed up for all of us decades ago. This is the very least we can do." Victor Langford's hand was still warm in James's grasp when the bustle behind them intensified. Though James had expected perhaps a call or a quiet rebooking, he had not expected this a man who ran an entire airline rushing through the airport like an intern late for his first interview. And he certainly hadn't expected what happened next. 8 minutes after the call to the veterans' first desk, Gate A12 had transformed. Where there had once been the dull monotony of boarding procedures, there was now a kind of organized chaos. Passengers stopped mid-step, craning their necks. Children paused their games. Even the TSA officer stationed nearby shifted his weight, sensing something unusual. It was as if the air had changed. Victor Langford didn't wait for protocol. He gave orders like a man used to being obeyed, but still moved with the urgency of someone who understood he was correcting a personal failure. He turned to his assistant, murmured something inaudible, and then fixed his gaze firmly on the gate podium. "Who's managing this flight?" he asked sharply, voice clipped but calm. Lindsay, still reeling, stepped forward. "That would be me, sir." Victor's face did not soften. "You're the one who reassigned Mr. Harlan. I was following reseating protocol based on Diamond Elite priority." He raised a hand, not to silence her, but to stop what he clearly recognized as a script. "You were following a system that did not account for context, empathy, or even our own stated veteran protocol. Do you understand how deeply we failed here today?" Lindsay opened her mouth, then closed it. Tyler stood behind her, watching, his face pale. Victor didn't wait for a reply. "Where's the flight crew? They're on board final checks before pushback," said the assistant into her headset. but we've notified them to delay departure. Good. Flight 362 will hold until this is resolved, Victor said firmly. Reopen the boarding bridge. Mr. Harlan will be seated in 1A. If that seat is occupied, I want the person in it personally escorted off with full upgrade compensation and our apologies. I will take their seat myself if necessary. Gasps rippled through the boarding area. Passengers turned to one another, whispering. Some began to film discreetly on their phones. James, still standing beside Victor, looked uncomfortable with the attention. That's not necessary, he said. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I only wanted Victor held up a hand, gently this time. You wanted dignity, you wanted fairness, and you should not have needed to fight for it. That's our burden, not yours. Within minutes, the gate agent assisting Victor's team had located the current occupant of 1A, a corporate client who, upon learning of the situation, surrendered the seat without hesitation and with a handshake to James. Victor turned to James once more. May I escort you to the plane? Sir James hesitated, then gave a nod. The two men walked together toward the boarding ramp, Victor slightly behind, as though guarding something precious. As they approached the aircraft door, the pilot himself stepped out to greet them. Captain Rosa Mendoza, a composed woman in her early 40s with silver at her temples and a fighter pilot's bearing, extended her hand. Mr. Harlan, she said with sincere gravity, on behalf of my crew, welcome aboard. We're honored to fly you today. James returned the handshake. Thank you, Captain. I'm grateful. Inside, the cabin had quieted. First-class passengers had been informed discreetly, and many nodded respectfully as James passed. A young man in 1A stood to greet him and offered a soft, "Thank you for your service, sir," before moving to a reassigned seat in row 3. James eased into the leather seat, and for the first time that day, his back relaxed into something other than disappointment. A flight attendant brought a warm towel and asked if he wanted anything to drink. He declined with a polite smile. Back at the gate, Victor remained a few more minutes to finish giving orders. Every gate agent, every customer service rep, mandatory retraining, effective immediately. Any case flagged with military or federal honor travel gets executive review. I want a human set of eyes before any reassignment. He turned to Lindsay, who had gone nearly silent. We'll discuss your future with Meridian Sky when I return. For now, you're relieved of boarding duties. Lindsay nodded, clearly shaken. Tyler, nearby, looked torn between guilt and relief. As Victor prepared to leave, he turned to his assistant. Also, notify our legal department. Mr. Harlan and his granddaughter full lifetime benefits. Priority seating, no expiration, no fine print. We'll send them a letter of apology and assurance. Draft it today. He paused before adding, and make sure Daniel, the one who took that call, gets a commendation. The company could use more Daniels. The assistant typed furiously as Victor walked away, loosening his tie as he disappeared back into the crowd. On board. James looked out the window as the jet taxied to the runway. The sky was a soft blue, the clouds light and drifting. He didn't think of policy anymore, or seating charts, or what would be posted online. He thought of Tracy, of how proud she would be, not because her plan had gone right, but because, when it went wrong, people still had the courage to fix it. He thought of young men who never came home, of long-forgotten medals in dusty drawers. And he thought of a stranger in a suit who had shown up not because he had to, but because it was right. Sometimes dignity arrived not with fanfare, but in 8 quiet minutes. As the plane ascended into the early afternoon sky, James sat quietly in seat 1A, his hands folded in his lap. The soft hum of the engines was a welcome contrast to the tension of the past hour. Outside, the clouds rolled beneath them like silent witnesses to a storm that had just passed, not of weather, but of principle. He had declined the offer of coffee from Victor Langford moments earlier. I don't need coffee, James had said, just to arrive on time and to be treated right. His voice hadn't wavered. It had carried the calm weight of someone who had endured worse than middle seats or missed connections. Victor had nodded solemnly, the look in his eyes that of a man who understood too late but acted just in time. "We failed you," he had said, not with logistics, but with respect. Nauran settled into the soft leather seat that once seemed a distant hope. James exhaled slowly. The pain in his back hadn't disappeared, but it was no longer the loudest voice in his body. In its place, a quiet affirmation lingered, not about the comfort of the seat, but about something far more rare: acknowledgement. Across the aisle, a flight attendant passed discreetly and gave him a small nod. No fanfare, no forced gratitude, just recognition. That was enough. Meanwhile, back at Gate A12, the fallout from the incident had begun to take shape. Brenda, the gate agent whose rigid adherence to policy had set the entire episode in motion, had been pulled aside by Victor Langford's executive team, though no shouting occurred. The tone was unmistakable, controlled, firm, and layered with consequence. The station manager, who had arrived midway through the confrontation, stood nearby scribbling notes and trying not to look visibly anxious. Brenda's composure had frayed. Her face was pale, and her replies were clipped and flat. She had worked for Meridian Sky for 12 years. She knew how the handbook read, but she hadn't known what to do when the handbook wasn't enough. By contrast, Tyler, the younger gate agent, was quietly called aside by the VP of Customer Experience. "I saw you try to speak up," she told him, handing over a folded slip of paper. "That matters," he blinked. "I didn't do much. You did more than most." Tyler later learned he would be recognized in the company's internal communications for his integrity and invited to participate in a pilot training program for conflict resolution. It wasn't a promotion, not yet, but it was the kind of opportunity that suggested someone had noticed. On board Flight 362, James wasn't aware of these internal shifts, nor would he have asked for them. He sat quietly, eyes closed, not sleeping, but remembering. His mind drifted to his youth, to a train ride in 1944 headed to basic training. He had worn a uniform that didn't quite fit, boots that felt too heavy, and a naive smile that had disappeared long before the war ended. He remembered how no one made room for him then either. How he had stood all the way to Missouri while civilians with briefcases sat comfortably nearby. Decades later, he still felt that boy inside him, sometimes standing, quiet, invisible. That was the thing about being overlooked. It didn't always bruise the surface, but it sunk deep. And yet, today had been different. Someone had seen him, and more importantly, someone had responded. The flight attendant returned with a warm cloth and a small envelope. "Captain Mendoza asked me to give you this," she said with a smile. James opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mr. Harlan, I've flown over 7,000 hours across 4 continents, but today it is my honor to fly you to Washington. Thank you for your service, your dignity, and your patience. I apologize on behalf of those who did not treat you with the respect you are due. Rosa Mendoza." Flight 362. James folded the letter carefully and placed it into his inside jacket pocket next to his medal citation, for all the medals and commendations he'd received. It was the handwritten words from strangers, the ones written without ceremony, that often meant the most. As the plane cruised above the clouds, Tracy's face appeared in his thoughts. She had tried so hard to make this trip special, to do something kind for him. He imagined her pacing her small apartment, hoping he was comfortable, maybe checking flight tracking apps every few minutes. She wouldn't know yet what had happened. He decided then not to tell her, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he didn't want to dim the joy of what she had tried to give him. What mattered now was not the row number or legroom. It was what this entire detour had revealed, that sometimes a system fails, but people within it still have the power to act, to pause, to step forward, to say, "This isn't right," somewhere over Virginia. James looked out the window. The clouds had thinned, and he could see patches of land below rivers carving through forests. highways cutting long ribbons across fields. The world looked peaceful from above, but he knew too well that peace, like dignity, had to be defended not always in battle, but sometimes in the quiet defiance of saying, no more. He adjusted his seat slightly and smiled to himself. It hadn't been about the seat. It had been about being seen. The plane landed smoothly at Reagan National Airport just as the golden afternoon sun filtered through the clouds. James remained seated for a moment after the final jolt, listening to the seatbelt signs go quiet and the shuffling of passengers eager to disembark. He gathered his things slowly, with no rush. His back still ached, but his spirit felt light, anchored not in comfort, but in the quiet knowledge that he had been treated like a person, not a problem. He was met at the terminal by a junior officer from the Army Honor Office, a young woman in dress uniform holding a placard with his name, her posture straight, her handshake firm. "Welcome to Washington, Mr. Harlan," she said. "We're honored to have you." James smiled, tipping his head respectfully. "It's good to be here." The ride to the hotel was smooth. Outside the car window, the streets of the capital rolled by monuments, tree-lined avenues, flags gently fluttering in the breeze. He had seen this city many times over the years, but never quite like this. Never with the sense that he was arriving not just as a guest, but as someone remembered. At the hotel, check-in had already been handled. The clerk handed him his room key with a soft, "Thank you for your service," and an envelope bearing the seal of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Inside was the schedule for the next day's events, a breakfast reception, a group procession to the Capitol lawn, and a ceremony presided over by senior military officials and the president himself. James read it all carefully, then folded it and slipped it into the breast pocket alongside the captain's note. That evening, he sat near the window of his hotel room, sipping tea and watching the lights of the city flicker on. He thought again of Tracy, how she would worry if she knew about the airport, how her careful planning might feel diminished if she learned of the downgrade, the confrontation, the scramble to make it right. So, he didn't tell her. When she called the next morning, her voice cheerful and proud, he listened quietly as she asked about the flight, the seat, the arrival. "All good," he said, smiling. "A little turbulence at the gate, that's all, but a few good people helped smooth it out." She didn't press. Perhaps she sensed something unspoken, or perhaps she trusted that whatever had gone wrong had been set right. Either way, her voice softened. "I just wanted it to be special," she said. "It was," James replied. "It is." The ceremony that afternoon was beautiful, solemn, and dignified. Rows of white chairs on the Capitol lawn, each filled with a veteran or their family. Uniforms gleamed under the sun, and the air was filled with quiet reverence. Names were called, medals glinted, and applause rose like waves against the marble steps. When James was introduced, the applause was long and sustained, but he didn't hear it as praise. He heard it as remembrance for the men he'd served with, for those who never made it home, and for the silent sacrifices that never made the papers. He stood, saluted, and then sat again, folding his hands in his lap. Later that week, back at Meridian Sky's headquarters, changes were underway. A memo was sent to every airport station titled the Harlan Protocol. It outlined a clear directive: any travel involving a Medal of Honor recipient or any veteran attending a national recognition event was to be escalated immediately to a senior oversight team. No exceptions, no automated downgrades, no loyalty tiers to override it. The protocol emphasized empathy, discretion, and direct human review. Employees were required to complete a new module in their annual training, Respect Beyond the Fair class, honoring our veterans. The case of James Harlan was cited not by name, but as a moment of institutional failure. Corrected by human courage, Lindsay, the gate agent, was quietly reassigned to a back office role. She wasn't terminated. Victor Langford believed in second chances, but she would no longer face passengers directly. Her performance reviews would now include discretion under pressure as a core competency, Tyler, the younger agent, was offered a promotion path into guest relations. When asked why he had hesitated that day, he simply said, "I thought policy might be wrong, but I didn't know if I was allowed to say so." Victor Langford himself drafted a letter to James, delivered by mail, "Mr. Harlan, there are moments when systems forget people. You reminded us not only to remember, but to respond. For that, and for everything you've given, we thank you. With respect, Victor Langford, President, Meridian Sky Airlines." Word of the incident spread quietly through military forums and veterans groups. It appeared on social media, written not as a scandal, but as a story with a rare ending, a correction made with humility. Posts titled "The Men in Seat 1A and Dignity, Not Loyalty Points" gathered thousands of comments, most from veterans who'd experienced similar indignities but never saw them made right. Some shared stories of long flights and pain. Others recalled indifferent service. But one recurring message stood out. Maybe things can change after all. James never sought the spotlight. He never gave interviews. And he never mentioned the incident again, not even at the reunion of veterans the following spring. But Tracy told a few friends in her teaching circle. She said only this: "My grandfather didn't get what he got because he demanded it. He got it because people finally remembered who he was." That's what respect should look like. And so, in the grand hierarchy of upgrades and loyalty points, somewhere behind the scenes, a quiet revolution had begun. One man, one middle seat, one phone call, and one decision to see not just a passenger, but a person. Because in the end, dignity can't be scanned, rerouted, or downgraded. It has to be recognized. And once it is, it must never be ignored again.